Hi, I'm Dr. John Whiteoak, and this video file is designed to support the individual feedback you've received based on the employee attitude survey you completed recently. You can see on your screen an image of the ZE model. ZE stands for the Zone of Engagement. This model has been developed using empirical research, meaning it's based on data collected from frontline staff in the mining and construction industry and now the asphalt and pavement industry. The model provides a framework that allows, using statistical methods, the capacity to position people on the grid based on their responses to questions about themselves and their work environment, and based on this suggests different levels of worker engagement. One of the goals of this research was to help people understand where they sit relative to their peers in relation to being engaged at work, and with this insight provide the potential through a range of strategies to help individuals move closer to the green zone, or what I call high ZE, in the top right hand area of the model. My research suggests individuals closer to this zone have a more fulfilling and successful work experience than those who are positioned away from the zone. Based on the results of the research, I'm also providing to the organisations involved recommendations in the form of strategies that can be implemented to create a work environment that is more engaging for its employees. Before I discuss the specific areas of the model, I would like to explain briefly how the model works. Looking at the model, you can see it has two main axes, one called cultural fit and the other called personal qualities. You can see it is possible to have a score ranging from high to low on both axes. On the right-hand side of the image are the dimensions that make up each axis. So depending on how you responded to the items in the questionnaire, you are positioned on the model. That is depicted with a red star in your personal feedback sheet. You can also see the grid has 5 sectors. You will find your position fits more or less within these 5 zones. The position is based on your responses to the survey questions in relation to the different elements that make up the model. In conducting the research, we received more than 230 responses from 4 organisations in the industry. The image you see on the screen now depicts where people are located within the model. Please also be assured that only you have access to your individual feedback, and this is not shared with anyone unless you choose to do so. A key focus of this research was on safety in the industry. Therefore, in this slide, I've plotted the position of individuals who have indicated that they've had an accident, a notable accident at work in the last 12 months. It's quite evident from this image that fewer people in Sector 1 have had an accident. Let's begin by explaining position 1. If the star on your feedback sheet locates you within this position, the responses you indicated in the survey suggest you are more likely to be engaged in your work, and from our observation seem less likely to have had an accident at work. The higher up and closer to the green line suggests the most engaged in a workplace. These individuals report having both high personal qualities and high cultural fit, and are more likely to be flourishing in their work. The question begs, however, what moves an individual away from enjoying high ZE, that is, being highly engaged at work? I find there are a series of influences on a person's workspace profile. The first of these influences characterises how well integrated a person is within their crew. We call this pod synergy, like a pod of whales working together to catch a meal. However, when you have a crew that is a bit dysfunctional, pod synergy will be lacking, and this creates a drift away from high ZE towards Sector 2 on the grid. If there's friction or a breakdown in the crew, one's work experience is much likely to be less engaging. On the other hand, when crew members look out for each other and there is a high level of synergy, negative events are less likely to occur, and when they do occur, will have less impact due to a crew that supports one another. If this is low, you may consider attempting to fit in more with your crew. In these situations, it's often the more we give, the more we get. If you know this is not possible based on your current crew, perhaps making an effort to nurture one or two close relationships in a workplace can help. Finally, asking for a transfer to another pod or crew may be what is required if you want to achieve high ZE more often in your workspace. The second influence likely to create drift away from a high level of engagement is when someone's situational awareness is lacking or they are distracted and not paying attention. People with higher situational awareness are more switched on to their work environment. They are aware of what's going on around them and they pay more attention to cues that may alert them to immediate danger, such as an accident. At the other extreme, those with lower levels of situational awareness operate as if they have blinkers on and seem oblivious to what is going on around them. You may know those people who just seem to be in a little world of their own. If you consider the best supervisors you have worked with, it's likely they have high situational awareness. An example is they usually keep an eye on their team and pay attention to how well they're travelling, both emotionally and physically. And because of their developed situational awareness, they notice when it's necessary to make changes, like simply moving people around or giving someone a break. And as such, means a more engaged supervisor and most likely a more engaged crew. The research I conducted also indicated, perhaps not surprisingly, that situational awareness plays an important role in safety. Higher levels of situational awareness make one more sensitive to environmental cues that might provide a warning of a potential accident, and as such, they make the appropriate adjustments to avoid a very disengaging event. To improve situational awareness, simply learn to become more attentive to the signals that are around you, perhaps even to the extent of verbalizing those signals to yourself. For example, as it turns out, trucks reversing is one of the main causes of fatal injuries on work sites. So when you hear the beep beep associated with a reversing truck, a mental reminder to pay more attention when a truck is reversing can help to improve situational awareness. This type of thinking can be applied to many different areas on the job site. But situational awareness signals are not just auditory, like a truck beeping or thunder in the distance, or visual even, like a road sign or an overly cluttered workspace. They can be more subtle, like a person's posture and the elements of their body language, such as their facial expressions, or something that looks out of place, like a workmate with their shoelaces undone, or noticing that someone is out of sorts today and they may need some additional support, or that you will just need to keep a bit of an eye on them. While situational awareness is a fairly complex phenomenon, it can be learned and developed. The military, the police, Australian customs are examples of where the importance of a more developed situational awareness capacity in the frontline staff is very well understood. So if you want to develop your situational awareness, start by simply reminding yourself to pay attention and look out for cues in your work environment. Reading these type of cues happens more often when people have higher and more developed situational awareness. And the more you practice, the better you become. When situational awareness extends into the future, and you have an ability to anticipate the way events are likely to unfold based on what is presently happening, we would then describe you as having foresight awareness. Put simply, good foresight is akin to good planning. Similarly, poor foresight is related to poor planning. Consider the most engaging work experiences or jobs you have been a part of. The research I've conducted suggests that we're often partly an outcome of good planning, or in other words, having good foresight. Most people tend to agree that the best supervisors also have developed foresight. On the other hand, when a job goes badly, it's often put down to bad planning. This bad planning or lack of foresight from a supervisor or crew member can create a highly disengaged crew. So like pod synergy and situational awareness, lacking foresight will be likely to cause a person to drift away from the more engaged zone to the less engaged zone on the grid. A simple example is forgetting to take the insect repellent on a fishing trip. The day all of a sudden became much more disengaging when the midges arrived. However, had someone spent the time to think into the future and foresee this negative event, it may have been avoided. This is a simple example, but evidence suggests improving one's foresight can help to avoid a disengaging day and an unfortunate event. And this skill can also transfer to life more generally as well. A simple strategy to improve foresight is just taking the time every morning to carefully think through, or as a crew, talk through your day. And if you identify a situation that could potentially be dangerous, think through the implications of what could happen next. If you would like to improve your foresight, attempt to engage in constructive self-talk. That is, remind yourself when you could have used better foresight today. Like situational awareness, the more you practice, the better you will become. You may have noticed that situational awareness and foresight actually work in unison. Situational awareness is noticing things. Foresight is understanding their potential implications. Another element here is PI, or your practical intelligence. That is your ability to understand your options and act on them. PI is to a great extent based on experience, but sometimes we might describe this as a general practical ability or common sense, maybe even street smarts. In any case, when all three are high, you're more likely to be closer to the zone of engagement. Alternatively, when one or more of these are lacking, you may find yourself drifting away from the zone. When elements of personal qualities beyond those already discussed are lacking, we find that people are less likely to be in Sector 1 and leave the zone altogether. They move into Sector 2. In Sector 2, we find that people generally identify reasonably well with the organisation, but are lacking in some elements of the personal qualities dimension. People in this area may find themselves more aligned with the principles and needs of the organisation than their own. It is likely the organisation provides them with a secure workplace or even a sheltered work environment. So people in this position may work hard to protect their jobs using organisational policies and rules. At the extreme end of the area, they may have the union rep on their speed dial. People may be in this sector because a number of key personal characteristics that my research suggests are linked to engagement are lacking. Some of these are more established or fixed than others. For example, a person's level of openness. Openness is described as a relatively stable personality trait. As such, it's more difficult, but not impossible, to change. People with lower levels of openness can be very attentive to their job, while at the same time be somewhat closed-minded about change. This may lead them to resist suggestions for doing things differently or trying a new work process. We find these types of behaviours are associated with a more disengaged work experience. Like openness, another key characteristic considered fairly stable impacting engagement is a person's conscientiousness. People with well-balanced conscientiousness tend to be reliable, they tend to do what they say they will do, and they tend to be organised and disciplined. On the other hand, those with lower levels of conscientiousness may be unreliable, undisciplined, and do things at the last minute. So if a person is both closed to change, that is lacking openness, and unreliable and undisciplined, that is lacking conscientiousness, and this occurs in conjunction with other elements of the personal qualities previously described, they are likely to drift out of Sector 2 into the high levels of disengagement, or Sector 5. I will discuss Sector 5 in more detail shortly. Zone 3 could be described as a comfort zone. Around half the population find themselves in or close to this zone. People in this zone are relatively happy to do a good job, feel reasonably comfortable with the organisation and the part they play in it. Individuals wanting to move from this area into areas of higher engagement should refer to specific elements of their personal feedback profile. There is no imperative in Zone 3 to have to do better. Things are probably going along okay, perhaps even good enough, but there is the opportunity to feel more engaged in your work by better understanding the elements that influence high ZE as outlined in the model. Sometimes individuals can perceive that the culture of the organisation is not sensitive enough to the needs of the individual or the work group. We find people in Sector 4 feel this very strongly. This view can differ widely within the sector, but it is most extreme for those positioned at the lower right end of the area. A number of factors come together to influence whether an individual finds themselves in Sector 4. Recall the personal qualities described earlier. Sector 4 individuals rate themselves relatively high on these. Thus there is a belief, and sometimes a very strong belief, that they are relatively well equipped personally to do the work that's required of them, but these individuals can feel let down by their organisation or may think that the management and or supervisors have not fulfilled their obligations in terms of appreciating their and sometimes others' inputs. It is unlikely this occurs based on a one-off event and is usually a combination of things. However, significant events such as an accident or promotion application being turned down can create a fast track in the Sector 4 from the other sectors. Overall, for one reason or another, people in this sector, in general, think that the organisation is managed in a way that is less than optimal for generating highly engaged workers. In other words, they have a low cultural fit and they are often not happy with their work environment and may feel like a fish out of water. Cultural fit in the ZE model is measured using an individual's perception of elements of the establishment, levels of job involvement, the way day-to-day performance is managed, and one's view of the capacity of the direct supervisors. It is possible to feel positively about your supervisor and still be in Sector 4 due to a negative view of the rest of the workplace, such as the establishment. The establishment is a combination of things that generally captures how well you feel the organisation operates. People in Sector 4 generally have a relatively low opinion of the way the organisation goes about its business. It is recommended where appropriate for those in Sector 4 to attempt to re-engage in communication with their supervisors regarding their needs and circumstances. Trying to align more with the organisational goals and values can also help. If this is not the issue, then perhaps attempting to re-engage in a more general sense of the organisation could be useful. This may take the form of attending a work function or a barbecue, perhaps providing some positive input at meetings and toolboxes, and using one's situational awareness to pay attention to the positive things the organisation is doing. We've found people in this sector can engage in a form of organisational martyrdom, that is personal withdrawal at their own expense. If your star is in this area, have a careful look at the distribution of accidents in the overall industry profile and realise that even though your personal qualities may be in abundance, you seem to be more likely to be exposed to risks than three of the other sectors. This could also be true of people in Sector 5. It is not evident that having low engagement was responsible for an unfortunate safety incident, and it may well be that an incident has allowed a sense of discouragement and disengagement to develop. Fortunately, there are fewer people in this sector than the other sectors. If your star is positioned in this sector, relative to your peers in the industry, you scored very low on both personal qualities and cultural fit factors. If you find yourself in this sector, when comparing the individual profile with the overall group profile, and you feel that your feedback is an accurate depiction, then it's in your best interest to communicate with your close crew members and make sure that you have a feeling that you are an effective crew or pod. It may also help to make an effort to understand situational awareness and foresight and the importance they play in cultivating a workday and a workspace that is less likely to involve risk. If you feel the organisation has a culture that is untenable or makes you feel uncomfortable, aim to engage in duties that you feel are more aligned with your skill set and values. For example, taking an interest in improving the workplace culture by joining a safety committee or something similar may be helpful. If you feel you're at risk of burnout, take steps to communicate your perception of burnout risk to the people around you, not only within the organisation, but with family members as well. It may be also useful to to engage with community organisations, or if available, your organisation's counselling or employee assistance program if they have one. In summary, please refer to your individual feedback and compare that to the description presented in the video. There is a degree of interpretation that is required when looking at individual results, and this feedback provides only a general overview. For example, if you're close to the edge of two sectors, elements of both sectors may be relevant for you to consider. I recommend looking at your personal profile, identifying areas that may be lower, and focusing on developing strategies to improve those. If you feel your results are inaccurate, then they may well be. However, the feedback is provided based on your responses to the survey relative to the way your peers have responded. I should also reiterate the model has been validated successfully in the mining industry. Even if you feel your results are not accurate, it may be worth looking into the feedback by discussing it with close friends and family before reaching a final conclusion about its validity. But I do also acknowledge the preliminary nature of the research and associated limitations. Finally, it is also possible that your position on the grid is based on how you responded on the day you completed the survey. As such, it may not be an accurate representation of your work experience in general, particularly if you are having an unusually good, alternatively an unusually bad day at work on the day you completed the survey. Kind of like a good or bad hair day, it may be a temporary experience. Nonetheless, I hope you found the feedback useful. Thanks for participating, and if you have additional questions or comments, please contact me, Dr. John Whiteoak, on 5459 4809, or respond to the email that contained your personal feedback sheet.